Bootloader Basics in Linux kernel. The bootloader is a small program that runs before the operating system, OS, starts. It is responsible for loading the Linux kernel into memory and handing over control to it. 1. Boot process overview. 1. BIOS, UEFI initialization, performs hardware checks, post power on self-test. Identifies and initializes storage devices. Transfers control to the bootloader. 2. Bootloader execution, loads the Linux kernel and an optional initramps, initial RAM file system. Passes kernel parameters. Transfers control to the kernel. 3. Kernel initialization, initializes CPU, memory, and hardware. Mounts the root file system. Starts the init system, e.g., systemd. 2. Popular Linux bootloaders. Grub, Grand Unified Bootloader. 1. Default bootloader for most Linux distributions. 2. Supports multiple OS booting, dual boot setups. 3. Configuration file. /boot/grub/grub.cfg. Lilo, Linux loader. 1. Older bootloader, replaced by grub. 2. Simple but lacks dynamic configuration. Syslinux, PXE Linux. 1. Lightweight bootloader used in embedded systems and PXE, network boot. U-boot, DOS U-boot. 1. Used in embedded systems and ARM-based devices. 3. Bootloader stages. Stage 1. Bootloader initialization. 1. Resides in the master boot record, MBR, or FE partition. 2. Loads the second stage of the bootloader. Stage 2. Kernel loading. 1. Loads the Linux kernel, VM Linux. 2. Optionally loads an initramps, temporary root file system for hardware drivers. Stage 3. Kernel execution. 1. The bootloader hands over control to the Linux kernel. 2. The kernel initializes system hardware and mounts the root file system. 4. Bootloader commands, grub, list available kernels. Bash copy edit ls, boot manually boot a kernel. Grub command line, bash copy edit set root equals, hd0. 1. Linux. VM Linux root equals. Dev. SDA1RO quiet initerd /initramps.image boot update grub after modifying configuration. Bash copy edit sudo update grub.